This is the 401k Fridays podcast, and I'm your host, Rick Unser. Now here we go with this week's episode. You're probably wondering, first, how do you possibly make a full podcast episode out of retirement plan document restatement and other related topics? And second, how do you make it interesting? Well, when you have a guest like Alison Cohen, ERISA Attorney and Partner at the Ferenczy Benefits Law Group, it's a piece of cake. Not much description needed on this one, but plenty of good nuggets and info for you to take away and implement as best practices. Also, Alison mentions a record retention policy statement. You can find that in the show notes through an easy link. Please use that at your discretion, and I hope you find it helpful. Before we get started, if you've been enjoying the podcast, please leave a review or rating on your favorite podcast service or app. That feeds the crazy algorithms and helps more people find the podcast, which makes it easy for me to get people like Alison to join us. That's it. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Alison. Well, Alison, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have you. And for this timely conversation around 401k or other retirement plan restatements, couldn't think of a better person to chat about this with. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Always good back.
So I guess we should start with, I don't know that we need to go all the way back to why do I have to have a plan document? I feel like that one's kind of understood, but I think a good question to ask or answer right now is, why do we have to go through this whole restatement process at all?
And why do we have to do it every 6 years? It just seems to a lot of people that it's a bit overdoing it. 6 years, though, is really, I think it's kind of a sweet spot. So I'll give you some very good concrete reasons why the IRS mandates that every roughly 6 years we have to go through this. The law changes, just flat out, the law changes over a period of time. And it is important that we capture those law changes and have a document that is in compliance with those changes. And I'll give you a few concrete examples. At one point in time, not to date myself or anything, because, I was only 12 at the time, but we had catch-up contributions introduced in 2002. Boy, I wish I was 12 at the time. Catch-up contributions hit the scene, super exciting. I think a lot of folks are happy to take advantage of that, but that was not an election in the plan document because it didn't exist. So at some point, you have to have a plan document that captures things like that. Roth deferral opportunities didn't exist at some point. So that has to be captured in the plan document. So if we want to be able to offer participants and put into our plan all of these spiffy opportunities, we have to keep the plan update with the times. And so to make it what they consider, the IRS considers a non-burdensome process, it goes through a cycle. I'll explain the 6-year cycle and why 6 years is kind of the sweet spot. So for 2 years, the IRS rounds up all the law changes, and every year they issue a list of here's everything that plan documents have to take into account. They give us some suggested language in many instances, and then they say, okay, document providers, update your plan documents. So the first part of the 6-year period is actually the folks behind the scenes that are busy at their computers, updating documents, getting them filed with the IRS. The next 2 years is when the IRS goes through those documents that are submitted and says, you didn't do this right, you need to rephrase this, I think you're off base here, this is great. And it's a negotiation between the IRS and the document providers to get the language exactly right. You, as a plan sponsor or financial advisor, don't probably care about any of that. The magic point comes for the last 2 years. And the last 2 years of the 6-year cycle is when the IRS blesses the new document, issues a new opinion letter on it, and now all of your third-party administrators, record keeper service providers get to go through the process of restating all of the plans onto the new document to keep them up to date with the law changes. So that's kind of the legal side of the process.
Got it. And The other thing that I've kind of heard that restatements do is, I guess, kind of coming back to your stuff about like catch-up and Roth and things of that nature. If people wanted those when they became available, they added those to their plan via amendment, right?
Right.
And in the restatement, do you sort of any amendments that you've made from the last time you did a restatement? So you've got your document, then maybe you've done 3 different amendments. You know, you made an acquisition, you added, just stick with the Roth example, maybe you made another change to your plan around eligibility or something. Do those all kind of get swept up as well in this restatement? So instead of having a document with 3 amendments, you end up with just a document again?
That is exactly it. It is an opportunity to roll up all the stray pieces. And it's not just those elective discretionary amendments that, hey, we changed trustees and we changed eligibility, but there's also the mandatory interim amendments. We went a long time without a whole lot of them. There was a period where there was one every single year, and then it was super quiet, and then there was an occasional one, and we're back to, it seems like we have amendments just about every year. All of those law changes get rolled up into the brand new document. So it makes for, if you're an administrator of a plan, it's like getting a fresh, clean manual as opposed to having to read through all of the, slip pages that you got that sits on top. Makes it easier to administer the plan and make sure that you're doing things correctly.
And I guess just fast forwarding to somewhat close to the current day, I mean, I think back to things like the Secure Act, the CARES Act that sort of hit over the last, let's call it 12 to 18 months. Will stuff like that appear in someone's restatement? I mean, I feel like a lot of the CARES Act stuff was kind of temporary. So I don't know. As you were talking through this, those were a couple things that were coming to my mind as well.
We're not going to see those because, as I described, the 6-year cycle. So we spent 2 years catching up the document for the law changes, 2 years negotiating with the IRS, and then we began 2 years restating. Well, Secure and CARES came out during the 2 years of the IRS negotiation. So at that point, the document was locked in. So your document is always going to be a little bit behind, and there's always going to be a need for these interim amendments. In part of why we can't just squish them into this document is we're still waiting on guidance on a lot of the language. For example, we don't know how we're supposed to handle the long-term part-time folks as part of Secure. And depending on what happens with Secure 2.0, I know, totally different topic, that may completely change the long-term part-time. So when you have actively moving legislation, let's call it, the Secure and the CARES that are still sort of in flux and pending language, you can't really roll it into an actual restatement. The restatements are for the things that are fully explained, that have all the guidance pieces. So this document, restatement, doesn't have a major piece of legislation attached to it. All prior restatements for the past 20 plus years have had names. They've had exciting names. We start with GUST way back when, and then we move to EGTRA, and then we had PPA, and so we've named them. Well, this sad little restatement that we're in right now is just called the third cycle restatement because there's nothing that happened during the legislative 6-year window that counts. And so I lovingly call it the tricycle because I just think it's way more fun. But I will pay you money. Rick, I will fly out to California. I will buy you dinner right here, right now. The next restatement in 6 years is going to be called the Secure Restatement because there's going to be so many changes to the plan document around that it's going to be named after it.
There you go. I like that. And I like the tricycle. I mean, hey, if you got a nickel for every time somebody said that, there you go. Maybe you could buy lunch.
Yeah, maybe. Depends on where you go. But yes, that's the problem is that we're always playing catch up because the law is ever changing. And so this gets us as close to caught up as we can, but we're still going to have interim amendments that are going to be issued in the next couple of years that we're going to have to adopt.
Perfect. I guess the question that always comes next for most people is, okay, now that I understand what this is, when do I have to have it done? Like, what are my deadlines? What happens if I don't meet those deadlines?
Sure. Deadlines are good. I'll fully admit I'm a little OCD. I'm a big fan of deadlines and having things planned out. And we have the 2-year window. So we have until July of next year. I don't recommend waiting to the last minute. Like, I am just not a last-minute girl because it doesn't give you time to pivot in case something doesn't go exactly right and smooth. So I don't recommend waiting to the last second, but we have until July of next year to get this thing signed. What happens if I somehow miss it, or my service provider never gets it to me and something happens, or I have a turnover and the person responsible leaves? Like, we hear all these stories. I have some really good news. The really good news is that the IRS allows a 1-year kind of grace period. So if you're on a pre-approved plan, you're in the 6-year cycle, you had a procedure and it just somehow didn't get followed in adopting this plan, you can self-correct as long as you get it done pretty gosh darn quickly right after the deadline. Once you go way past the deadline, so one of the things that's already bubbling up right now, and I hate to say it, is as people are entering the tricycles, they're finding out they don't have a PPA restatement, which is the one that was from 6 years ago. Oopsie, it's super late. So for the PPA missing restatements, we have no choice. The only way to correct it is to go to the IRS, to hang our head in shame, explain why we are so sorry that we didn't get this done. You pay a user fee, the IRS pats you on the head, issues you a letter of forgiveness, and you move on your way. So it's annoying, it's time-consuming, it is not the end of the world, it's not going to cause things to go, end over tea kettle. What you don't want to have happen is you don't want somebody to find out that you're missing your restated documents for you. And by that I mean you don't want the IRS or the Department of Labor coming in to take a look at your plans and seeing that you're missing your documents, because that creates a whole level of problems, that increases the fines and the penalties, and quite frankly, it's an easy thing to spot. It's one of the softball things. So you want to make sure that you have a comprehensive document library. And I'm going to use this opportunity. You don't even have to prompt me with a question for this one. If you do not have a record retention policy, let me be clear. You cannot ever, that's 3 evers, throw out your plan document. So when you get your brand new tricycle document and it has that, freshly mimeographed kind of smell about it and you're all excited, or maybe you got it electronically and you're tingly because you don't have paper, that does not mean that you get to go into your files and purge your prior plan documents. By law under ERISA, you are required to keep the plan documents for the entire life of the plan. That is a never throw out rule until basically 7 years after the plan has been completely shut down. So what people do, which runs into trouble later on, is they get their new document and they throw their old stuff out. Don't do that. Make sure you retain your plan document.
And that's a really good point, because I swear one of the questions we get a lot, whether we're talking about, well, let's just keep it in this context of IRS and plain document stuff, is the inevitable question is, what is the statute of limitations? What is that look back period? How far back into the past can the IRS or the Department of Labor go? And I feel like what you just said there is a little different than maybe what some people might think in terms of, I guess, looking backwards at what their potential.
How much do I have to keep and when? And it is confusing. It's not a delight. I will also tell you that different documents have different rules just because I think somebody likes to mess with us. And just, make sure that we're on our toes and keeping it real.
It feels like that sometimes.
It does. So I will tell you the general rules under ERISA, the things that we have to keep for a specified period of time. Let's start with the easy stuff. So I have to use 7 years in your head. I have to keep all the 5500s, the financial audit reports, valuations, trust reports, testing, that type of stuff. I have to keep that for a period of 7 years. Okay, that's like tax documents, just like my own personal tax return. You're on a 7-year type of retained thing. And then you have documents that have to be kept throughout the life of the plan because you have certain statute of limitation issues, you have certain, what if somebody comes back and asks for stuff. So we have things that have to be kept indefinitely. Plan documents being the number one thing that you have to keep on an indefinite basis, again, until the plan is terminated and killed. You also need to keep things like census data, distribution forms, proof of rollovers and loans and stuff. Because what you don't want to have happen is to have an employee from 10 years ago come forward and say, I was entitled to benefits under that plan. I never got my benefits. And people have purged all the records and they have no idea.
Yeah, and I feel like that's something that kind of happens every year or two to companies, especially, I don't know what time of year this happens, but I feel like a lot of people get those letters in the mail that say, hey, you might have some money that is owed to you by this plan. And inevitably somebody sends that into HR. They haven't worked there in 15 years, but they feel very strongly that this letter says there's $20,000 in the plan for them. And no one has a record of who this person is, but it's that becomes a really interesting conversation. And to your point, if you don't have the records, it becomes a very quickly frustrating conversation for everybody to either prove or some other way say, no, the company didn't steal this money from you, or no, your money's not here, it's here. So that's a good, all good points on your end.
Especially if you're part of an entity that has gobbled up other entities like little Pac-Man. When you gobble that other entity, you better make sure that you have the right procedures in place to keep all of their prior records. I'm currently working with a company that acquired a company that acquired a company. So we have a 3-level fish eating fish situation. And the problem is there's 26 people now in this plan that my big fish has acquired that came from the 2nd-level little fish. They have 0 records on who these people are. They have no idea. They have money in a plan. They don't know who they are. They don't know how to get in touch with them. They don't have beneficiary forms. They don't have enrollment forms because nobody along the line realized they should keep those records. So a plan should come with almost in a suitcase, electronic or otherwise, where records are just kept in this electronic suitcase, and whoever inherits the plan, the suitcase comes along with it to make sure that they have a full amount.
No, I like that.
So these are definitely some of the challenges that we see when dealing with this type of process.
And before I pull you back to restatements, do you have a handy-dandy little cheat sheet of how long you're supposed to keep various documents or records for that maybe we could share with people?
Absolutely. We feel very strongly in making sure that people are doing the right thing. So I have a sample record retention policy document that we put together that people can customize, but it outlines the different groups of plans and their different statute of limitations. So I'm absolutely happy to share that with folks just to make sure that they can at least, do this right. It's important.
Perfect. Well, I will include a link to that in the show notes. So awesome.
Wonderful.
Well, getting back to restatements, I feel like the other inevitable question we get from a lot of folks is, well, is this something that I bear a fiduciary responsibility towards or have any type of fiduciary risk, or is doing this restatement something that we need to talk about with our fiduciary committee or investment committee that oversees the retirement plan? So I know I kind of threw a lot of little itty bitty questions at you there, but general theme there is fiduciary responsibility around restatements. So thoughts there?
Absolutely. I highly recommend discussing it with the committee. I use the expression that as long as the patient is open and on the table, like, let's see what else we need to get done. And that's really what applies here. If you're going to have to go through the exercise of restating your plan entirely onto a new document, this is the time to have that high-level meeting with your advisors and say, what's really working for us, what's not working for us, what changes do we think need to be made, and to really strategically approach this as an opportunity to do a checkup and a check-in. And this is great as a fiduciary, as a plan sponsor, and just think about all the things that changed in the law. You may not have had a comprehensive discussion about it. This sort of spurs that conversation. So there is lots of opportunity here to make sure that it's done and done correctly.
As you think about done correctly, the last thing you just said there, I feel like there's always whenever when the patient's open and on the table and you've got all these little provisions and nuances and you're kind of going from all these things that have maybe been cobbled together over the years to kind of this new restatement, relying on your provider or kind of relying on that, let's call it that a side-by-side chart, like, hey, I'm with, provider ABC for the old plan. I'm still with provider ABC for the new plan. I don't know. I mean, can a plan sponsor and their service partners sort of reasonably rely on, okay, hey, if they're giving me a pre and post grid or, prior and new kind of grid to compare what is either staying the same or changing in this restatement process, is that something they can kind of reasonably rely on? Or are there things that they should be doing on their own if they, if they want to dig a little deeper, et cetera?
Oh, absolutely. They need to dig a little deeper. Just perspective, because I have worked for a very large record keeper bundled service provider. And so I've actually been a spearhead person for several of these restatements. And so you understand, anyone in their own realm, just picture this. You have the same amount of staff. You don't get to add anybody, but yet I'm going to take everybody's workload and I'm going to double it. And that's pretty much what it's like during a restatement window. And so when you do that type of scenario where I'm just going to take everybody's workload and double it, the reality is mistakes happen. And even though you get this nifty summary that gives you the legal overall, hey, here's what happened before, here's what we legally changed language-wise now, and that's just strictly based on how the document got updated, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are covering the specifics of your plan. It also doesn't mean that they have done everything possible to make sure that Amendment number 2 that you did in 2018 got incorporated into this particular iteration of the document. And that is just, it's not saying anything negative about the vendors. It is the nature of the beast that the sheer volume of work that is involved in this type of a massive undertaking, there are going to be things that are dropped. There are going to be things that are missed. And so it is up to everyone to really put eyes on this new document before it gets signed. I will also tell you what happens during restatement windows is that if you do take that wonderful time to review and really make sure that you've done your due diligence, you are going to have a conversation inevitably that says, that's funny. I didn't know our document said that. Which, is kind of silly to say, but it happens all the time where somebody doesn't realize. I just had a conversation the other day with somebody where we were talking about the restatements and what could go wrong, and I said, well, the number one thing that you should look at and really scrutinize is the definition of compensation, because people don't understand it. They don't think about some of the things that they do. And she very confidently says, oh, I'm sure our definition is correct. And I continued talking anyway, as I am wont to do. And I said to her, oh, that's really great. I mean, because a lot of people missed things like, they give out gift cards that, are counted on their W-2s, but they just hand out, $50 Starbucks gift cards, and that could be compensation. And then if they have stock options, and she goes, wait, go back to the gift card thing. It's like, what was that about gift cards? And it turns out that this very confident person who was certain that she didn't have any compensation issues with her plan is now opening up a whole can of worms because they have been doing gift cards and they haven't been considering it for plan purposes, and it is not something that is excluded from the definition of compensation. So she now has some work to do in figuring out the scope of what the issues are. But the good news is that on the new restatement, on her new tricycle document, she will have a proper definition of compensation that matches what they're doing in operation. So this is a really important conversation to be having and making sure that, again, in 6 years, your organization may have changed quite a bit. 6 years ago, you may not have been able to afford to pay your employee bonuses. And now you've grown and now you are paying bonuses, but are you handling those bonuses correctly under the terms of your plan document? So every 6 years, your organization has changed. It's a good opportunity. Is the matching contribution next to compensation? Matching contributions are the number 2 thing that get messed up in retirement plans in general and during restatements especially. Understanding if you have a discretionary match versus a mandatory match, important distinction to have. And if you have discretionary matching contributions, are you doing the proper annual board resolutions to make sure that you're effectuating those changes on an annual basis? A lot of people aren't doing that properly, and that can run into some problems. So this is a really great opportunity and not a burden, in my humble opinion, where you can analyze and figure out where you may have some work to do and fix it proactively, which is better than reactively every single time.
I'm with you there. And I think just like last year, we had a lot of questions and concerns about pausing or freezing matches. I feel like this year, for those that have maybe had to do that in the past, it seems like things are now coming full circle where matches are being turned on or implemented or reinstated. So I guess any thoughts or anything else you'd share about kind of issues you're seeing with matching, especially if people are sort of reactivating them from maybe post-pandemic recovery?
The key to all of plan administration is document, document, document. Whatever you do, whatever you decide, write it down. Have it memorialized somehow, somewhere, that you did the thing that you think you did, because that is going to be the key that people are going to look at if they ever decide to come and examine your plan. So for the matching contributions, I stopped it, but how did I document that stoppage? And then I started it again. How did I document that starting? And then given where my financial state is of my company, maybe I need to rethink what my match formula should be. Maybe based on the fact that, people really are hungry for getting back into things, and I want to help people make up because I had to furlough them. I want to help them make up for things. Maybe I need to switch my formula, make it a little bit more generous, or stretch it out so people have to defer more money in order to receive the match to encourage them to make sure they have savings for those types of rainy pandemic days. So again, it's a good time to check in with your philosophy regarding the plan and then make sure that the document reflects that philosophy.
Very well said. Kind of, I guess, similar vein here, but slightly different. The general concept that you need a signed plan document. I think we've talked about this, or I'm sure a lot of people have heard that, hey, if you don't have a signed document, you don't have a signed plan document. Is that still a fairly true and accurate statement?
Well, if you don't have a signed document, of course you don't have a signed document. But what the statement really is if you don't have a signed document, you don't have a plan. At the end of the day, a plan only exists because we have memorialized it in writing. And so, unfortunately, we do come across situations where people cannot find that they ever, this is typically small employers, solo Ks, those types of things, and somebody suggested to them that they start their little plan but never actually filled out the paperwork to do so. That is probably the hardest thing rather than I just have an old document, because no document means the IRS could say, then therefore there is no plan. Therefore, every penny that you think you ever put into this plan is now disqualified. And as a result, every deduction retroactively gets taken away, which triggers penalties, interest. There's additional, if you grossly understate the amount of taxes that you owe, there's this additional draconian penalty that they can add on top of it. It's horrible. It's a horrible, horrible thing. So if you can't find plan documents, you may think they're there. This is when you need to get help and go figure out what we can do voluntarily to get the situation fixed, because you don't want to be caught with your pants down on that. That is the worst case scenario I can think of.
Well, and thank you for stressing the importance. And here comes my question. In this day of DocuSign and Adobe Sign and other sort of electronic means of signing things, does that count when it comes to signing a 401k or other qualified retirement plan document? Or do we still need a wet signature on a piece of paper?
The IRS has finally joined us in this century. I know, crazy talk you say, but yes, the Internal Revenue Service has said that if it is a identifiable, legitimate DocuSign type of thing, they will accept that as an actual signed document. You do not need to have a wet signature anymore, which I know, hallelujah from the back row on that one. It only took them, a decade to get there. But electronic is fine. You just have to make sure you're still keeping that document in some shape or form. You have to have some electronic means of storing it so that when an agent comes knocking, you're able to easily retrieve it, print it, produce it, and it's as if the wet signature document is present and accounted for.
Perfect. Well, that's better news than I was expecting. So there you go. And the other thing, I guess, just kind of on that kind of similar vein in terms of things that have changed or not, I remember way back when where kind of this idea of having an individually approved plan document was a thing. You would use maybe you would use a provider's document, but you would check all your boxes and maybe write things in that you needed to write things in to make it conform to what you wanted to have happen in reality. You would then send that document into the IRS. They would review it and send you back a letter saying, we've reviewed and we've approved your plain document. Does that still exist?
There are two types of documents in the universe. There's individually designed plans, which are typically truly custom, not off of a template. Law firms are the ones that would create them in all usual. And this is the most expensive, most risky, most difficult document to own. And the reason is not only because, yes, you're paying a law firm, but you are required to update that document annually, whereas pre-approved, it's a 6-year window. You don't have the benefit of getting the wonderful 6-year, pre-approved letter. The IRS, because of funding and budget and other issues, pulled the plug on almost all determination letters. That's what that specialty letter used to be called. Once upon a time, anyone could go in and they can get a determination letter. So even if you were on a pre-approved plan, but you somehow modified that plan in a small way, shape, or form, you would go into the IRS and you would say, hey, here's the choices that I made, and I checked these boxes, others, and do you have any problems with this? And the IRS would look at it and say, no, you're still good. And you would have that assurance in your back pocket. They pretty much took that away. And even the true custom individually designed plans now can get a birth certificate and they get a death certificate. And any changes in between that cannot be submitted for a ruling by the IRS. And this is where it gets really risky. So if anyone makes a mistake in drafting that document somehow, some way, you're not going to know it until you get audited, which is not the time that you really want to find out that you have a mistake in your document. And it's just one of those things that a lot of people were really, really upset about. It was also one of the driving forces behind getting most plan sponsors off the individually designed document, if at all possible. So you don't see a whole lot of them anymore, specifically because of the risks that are involved in maintaining that type of plan.
Got it. As I'm thinking through this, kind of the inevitable question that comes up from some employers is, wow, now that we've dug into this is really complex stuff. Is there somebody other than our record keeper or our, TPA or whoever that we could consult that would be another set of knowledgeable or educated eyes to make sure we're not missing something or there's not other things that we should be thinking about as we go through this restatement process?
Absolutely. Obviously, you can go to your friendly lawyer and have them walk you through the document. If you just really want a good comprehensive review and to talk about possible changes, your third-party administrator can probably do that. Some bundled service providers might be able to do that, but as a general rule of thumb, they are not designed for that high-end consulting. They're more of a mass processor rather than a let me hold your hand and walk you through this. There are some financial advisor folks that are highly intelligent that can certainly do this type of work for you. There are consultants that are out there that you can engage solely for the purpose of, hey, help me walk through my document. But as a general rule of thumb, you're probably going to want to get a legal opinion going through. And like I said, it could be in conjunction with your other providers where you talk about other things you might want to change in the document. Maybe you're confident you do it yourself, but I just can't stress enough, do not sign something that you have not read. Assuming that everything is good is, well, we know what happens with assumptions. So whoever does the review, just make sure that they're looking very detailed. And it's boring stuff, kids, not going to lie. This is not like the latest Grisham novel page turner where you can't wait to see who done it on the next page. It's going to be compensation in the ballroom with a candlestick. Like, I know how it ends. But you want somebody to go through it and just make sure that all the amendments got incorporated correctly. You want to make sure that it has those key provisions. Like I said, compensation, match, profit sharing. Those are the three biggies. Eligibility, I would put on that list. So if you don't have time to scrutinize the whole document, eligibility, make sure you're including and excluding the right people in your plan. Looking at the compensation definition in vivid detail. How do you handle people that terminated, not terminated, all that good stuff? Matching, profit sharing, is it the right formula? Is it how we're doing it? Those are probably the most important and most often incorrect sections. But make sure your document gets reviewed by somebody. There's plenty of qualified folks that can do that for you.
Thank you for that. I feel like this is also one of the things that comes with in the world of administering 401k plans, that comes with that typical warning label of, here's a bunch of information for you that we feel you can rely on, but we are not attorneys. We can't give you legal advice. If you want that, or, we highly recommend that you seek legal advice if you want bippity bippity bip. So
I know, don't you?
Yeah.
Makes people crazy. I thought I hired you to be able to do this. Why are you now telling me that I have to spend more money in getting legal counsel to take a look at my document? Yeah, I get that.
And I think for some people, it's, okay, that's the typical warning label. I get it. And then I think other people really sit back and say, hold on a second. Should I be hiring legal counsel? Do I need an attorney for this? And it's a good question. I think it's a good mental process to go through. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there for you as the legal mind on the in the conversation, and just kind of get your thoughts on that a little bit.
Well, the answer is that the service provider's disclaimer is a true statement. They are not legal counsel. They are not in a position. They draft the document to the best of their abilities and their skills, but they are not a law firm. There's some things that they do and they do well, and then there's other things they still do well, but they need to give you that advice that you may benefit from seeking legal counsel. I am a generally competent person around the house, I'll tell you. If I wanted to, a couple weeks ago, I hated the faucets for just whatever reason. They were driving me nuts, and I decided I was going to change out all of the plumbing hardware in my house, all the faucets and stuff. I can do that myself. I'm pretty confident about, I turn off the water, I do the thing, good. When it comes to something like, hey, the water line that's running underneath my driveway is leaking, causing my water bills to go up, I am not about to trench underneath and run a main water line to my house. So it is a question of figuring out your boundaries and where they are. So know where you're comfortable, and know that this is every 6 years. If every 6 years you have to, actually interact with us lawyer people, I promise we're mostly very painless. It's not that bad, and you're setting the foundation for everything that's going to go forward from that point on your house. It's a good check-in. It serves a lot of great purposes. If your plan is not regularly audited because you're a small plan, great opportunity to do a every 6 year kind of a checkup. Just like we go to our doctor, we get our cholesterol check, we get other stuff checked. We may not have any symptoms, but it's good to go in and get that checkup because they may pick up on things that we normally wouldn't. So rather than thinking of it as a burden, think of it as a good, preemptive, positive checkup so that we don't have to deal with bigger problems down the line.
A stitch in time saves 9, yeah?
Absolutely. Penny smart, pound foolish. There's many mother expressions that we can throw in here. The other time that I definitely say, hey, you should probably get legal counsel is when you are told that you have problems with your plan, that your vendor may discover that there are issues that are going on. And if there is a hint that the problems could have perhaps been caused by that vendor, think about are they really acting in your best interest when they're making their recommendations, or are they acting in their own best interest? Those might be situations where even though the vendor seems to be giving you some pretty good solid advice, they might have a dog in the fight. And so therefore their advice may not be as comprehensive as it could be. So that is definitely another instance where I think it is very beneficial to just bite the bullet, find somebody, that you can talk to, spend an hour or two with, consult on the matter, and make sure that you're getting really the best advice from your vendor.
Yeah, and the other one to me, and I'm sure there's more, and I'd love to just kind of get a few more of your thoughts there in terms of do not pass go, do not collect $200, make sure you bring that independent legal team into the conversation, is when it comes to things like controlled groups, affiliated service groups. And I think in this day and age where, there's a lot of M&A activity going on in the market right now, there's a lot of investors coming out of different entities or different companies. And there's a lot of companies that are sort of in flux as it relates to, who owns them, who doesn't own them, who are they related to, who are they not related to. And I feel like when you get into those conversations, those obviously come with the warning labels, or should come with warning labels, but also can get very tricky very quickly. And I feel like is ultimately, I don't know, maybe have to is too strong of a word, but I feel like that's a conversation that you can really only reliably navigate with an attorney.
Yeah, that is a just it depends type of thing. And here's what it depends on. There are always certain very plain, it's going to smack you in the face, anyone who knows anything can figure it out. If I, as an individual, own 100% of Company A, and then I tell you, Rick, that I own 100% of Company B, you should not need an attorney for that analysis. Like, that is a smack you in the face. Yes, you're a control group. You're done. Go away. But there are so many nuances and so many subtleties in the law. And when you get into affiliated service groups, it is infinitely worse, because those regs haven't been updated since 1984, and many of that is in proposed form. So it's interpretive, it's gray, it has some very difficult avenues to navigate. I absolutely recommend that you need to bring in an expert, and that, don't try this at home, kids, type of situation. Because, again, it's let's talk about my competency and my not so competency. Yes, I can change a faucet in my house. Yes, I could probably change the oil in my car. I don't mess with brake lines. I'm not going to fix the gas tank. Like, there's just certain things that you have to understand is going to have very, very negative repercussions if you make a mistake. If you make mistakes on controlled and affiliated service groups, from that point forward, there is potential for tremendous financial liability if you've gotten it wrong. And it's not very forgiving. So you want to make sure that that's something that is done correctly, and that the person who's doing the analysis is able to stand by that analysis. Otherwise, if it comes up 4 years down the road, you may find yourself with substantial liability because every year of administration has been wrong since then. I will scare you with one story real quick, just because, I don't know, I seem to like to do that to people. But I'm talking with a client right now who alleges they were told by somebody, they can't put their finger on who told them this, that they were allowed to segregate their management people into one plan, which of course has very generous benefits, but the 700 rank and file employees are currently covered under a different retirement plan. When they moved to their new TPA, and the TPA said, "Oh, tell me about your other plans," and they said, "Oh, yeah, well, we have 2 plans," and da-da-da, and the TPA went, "Okay, red flag on the field. We're stopping everything. We are not moving forward. This isn't good." And they said, "Oh, but we have a letter from somebody from, years ago that said we could do this." And we have yet to see this letter. Mm-hmm. And now we're talking from a financial, just a ballpark, we're talking over $1 million+ in corrections.
Wow.
So don't play with this stuff. Don't play with matches, kids. Unless it is a very, like I said, straightforward, I own 100, you own 100, we're done. Probably you should recommend them that they get legal advice and that somebody make a proper determination as to whether they are controlled and especially affiliated. Oh, affiliated service groups are hard. Here, even at the law firm, that's the sort of stuff that we reserve to the most senior attorneys because of all of the subtleties and the nuances involved.
Yeah, and I'm with you, and I've had some stuff recently where it's like, oh, well, we don't own 80% of them, so we're good. Yeah, that's the type of stuff where I'm like, yeah, have you run that by an attorney yet, or is that something you're self-diagnosing?
Yeah, well, we had a CFO of a very, these private equity firms that, again, like the Pac-Man game are just gobbling things up, that said, oh, the control group rules are optional. In writing. Control group rules are optional. It's really just a pricing thing to help, but we're not choosing to follow them. And I was like, you're not choosing to follow them. Well, isn't that nice?
Well, there you go.
I don't think the IRS is going to agree.
Let us know how that works out.
Yes, exactly.
Well, since we're kind of on this theme, are there other sort of big ones out there? We've talked about the significance of the document, and we've talked now about the significance of kind of getting controlled group right and how that is a topic to potentially kind of bring in, outside legal versus relying on sort of non-legal advisors. Anything else as it relates to, retirement plan administration that would come to mind, or that would be an absolute, again, maybe as I said, do not pass go, do not collect $200 without talking to an attorney?
The moment you are notified that you have had the unfortunate circumstance where you are going to be examined or audited by the IRS or the Department of Labor, I know a lot of people want to try and take it on themselves, and there's some TPA folks that say, oh, we'll help you navigate through that. Here's the problem. Unless you know that your plan is squeaky clean, so you've been through an audit, you've just, you're the typical perfect textbook plan administrator, you probably want to have somebody involved. Even if the TPA takes lead, you want to have legal counsel walking alongside you as this goes on. And the reason that happens is because if somebody else starts the audit and they tell a story and they start making statements that are just wrong or lead to very bad things, it is very hard then to pivot and bring legal counsel in now that the IRS is saying, great, we're going to disqualify the plan and you have a, $80,000 sanction. I can't jump into the middle of that picture and say, yeah, everything that guy said, that was wrong, and pay no attention. Let's start over. Yeah, I can't start over. I can't make them etch-a-sketch their memory and unring the bell. And so it's sometimes very difficult coming into an audit midstream and having to pivot because the person handling the audit did a bad job. I'll give you another example. The CPA started the audit by his little lonesome, and he is not a benefits person. He is just a personal tax person, and the issue came up relating to a loan that the pension plan lent money to another entity that happened to be owned by the same guy. We are right dab smack into the middle of prohibited transactions. And the CPA, not knowing anything about prohibited transactions or what's permissible on the retirement plan side, told the auditor in writing, oh, the transaction was fine because they're related entities. So he knew that it was a prudent thing and it was all good. And the IRS said, isn't that charming? Immediate referral over to the EP plans audit side. So now we have two different audits that are going on. And I try to argue as to why it's not a prohibited transaction, that he's not a disqualified person. And he says, yeah, but I have this in writing from the CPA where he admits the guy had full control of the company, and he admits that it's related entities. So how, again, is this not? And I was like, oh, well, maybe it is, but let's talk about I'm in a box.
These aren't the droids you're looking for. Let's talk about this over here.
These are not the droids you're looking for. Exactly. And that's the challenge. The challenge is that once the damage is done, it is very hard to undo that damage. So even if you have a vendor that says, oh, we'll spearhead this audit process for you, that's great, but you still want to have somebody kind of on the sidelines. So when something is discovered at some point by the TPA, there's hey, let's talk about the strategy on the response to this. We often will kind of co-write or ghostwrite on audit cases. So we let the TPA do all the heavy lifting to gather the documents. We'll look them over just to make sure there's no smoking guns, and then ghostwrite the communications. That way it costs less, it allows the TPA to do most of the work, but at the same time, we can see things that are coming that they can't. So that would be probably my number one, get help, don't do it yourself. This is not a DIY project.
Awesome. Well, as usual, we've covered a ton of ground, and you've been informative, entertaining, as always. How do people find you, or where's a good place to go if they like what they heard and want to know more about Alison?
If they are looking for any information about our firm, and we only practice in retirement plans, they can go straight to our website. It's ferenczylaw.com, and I know Ferenczy is tough. It's FERENCZY law.com, or you could Google Alison Cohen and the word ERISA, and you'll find me right away. I'm out there, so we're happy to help. And if you're looking for an attorney, for whatever reason that's local, I am also still very happy to get you help that you want, even if it's not me, rather than let you kind of struggle on things. So please know that I just support making sure people have the right decisions and the right folks in their corner.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining me. Great fun and great information. So hopefully we'll find another topic and we'll have you back again in the future.
Let the restatements begin.
For the tricycle.
For the tricycle. And then when the secure starts in 6 years, so if I'm right and it's named secure, what do I get? Like, are you going to buy me lunch?
I think that sounds like a good deal.
Okay, I love it.
All right, Alison, thanks again for joining as always, and look forward to chatting again down the road.
Thank you, Rick. Really appreciate it.
And there you have it. Alison Cohen, ERISA Attorney and Partner at the Ferenczy Benefits Law Group. Great stuff, interesting and informative. Always a good combo, checking lots of boxes. So hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Coming up on the podcast, I have a great conversation teed up with Frances Donald of Manulife. I still use her description of how to describe negative interest rates to someone. So if you missed that on the last episode that I had with her last year, probably a good one to check out. Also have Josh at PGIM coming up, where we are going to be talking about what the next 3, 5, or even 10 years could look like for 401k plans and other workplace retirement programs. So interesting stuff to kind of stare into the future. If you're not subscribed, take care of that today. Just go to your favorite podcast app and search 401k Fridays and hit subscribe. Or if you would prefer to do it on the computer, just go to 401kfridays.com/subscribe, and there's lots of buttons you can push there that'll take care of it for you. That's it for today. Until next time, I hope you make your Friday a 401k Friday.
And now for some disclosures. The content in this podcast is provided for educational and discussion purposes only. Investing involves risk, including a potential loss of investment. Lockton does not and cannot guarantee the future performance or specific level of performance, the success of any investment, or success of any strategy. Nothing contained herein may be construed as investment or legal advice.